We used to see in domestic violence that about 80% of the people would reoffend. But if they go through a program that gives that attention focused on how they can change their core beliefs, it switches, and then only 20% reoffend. And most of them, if they continue at it, they'll get it.
Welcome back, Dr. Gray Otis with us tonight. I'm Aurora Nino, and we're going to be going into chapter 5. This is blocking the heart and mind, understanding how we cope. So can we jump in? What blocks our worthiness to love and to be loved?
Well, that's a good question, and that's why this chapter was written, because there are a lot of things that interfere with us developing positive core beliefs. And then we kind of sometimes will adopt kind of behavioral patterns, and they become even more difficult to get around. Mm-hmm. And so that's why this chapter really refers to some of these blocks and some of these coping mechanisms that don't work for us and add to negative core beliefs. And so it's important to understand how these kinds of dynamics are working out. And most of them we're not even consciously aware of. They just kind of come out of the blue almost, but they have a reason and a rationale behind them. If we understand that, then we can start to make some changes, and then we can adopt some a positive coping abilities, we call them, among other things, the key skills that we all need to be aware of and to implement in our lives.
It sounds like it's important to know where they start, and it's also important to know how these cycles continue.
Yes.
And how to break them.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Why we're here tonight. So how do trauma and chronic distress affect our core beliefs? I know there's two, there's trauma and chronic distress. Can you go into just briefly describe the difference between those and why those are both important?
Yes. Trauma is pretty easy to define. It's usually some kind of overwhelming, emotionally threatening experience to the individual. Okay. Combat is a classic one, but criminal assault, but even a traffic accident. It threatens the person's existence, if you will. Also, psychological trauma can come out of experiences where somebody that we care about is threatened. So we're not involved in the traffic accident, but maybe our son or daughter was, and we're just, deathly afraid. Or somebody in our family is dealing with a possible terminal disease. Those kinds of things can be trauma as well. And they often result in what is referred to now as post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are fairly easy to identify, and we see them as traumatic experiences that are impacting our core beliefs as we kind of shift. And so one of the most common ones that come out of trauma is I'm unsafe, or my child or loved one is unsafe. But there are many, many others that can come out of these kinds of experiences, and all of us are going to react to these kinds of traumatic events in different ways.
Right. How many people do you feel go through a truly traumatic event in life?
It's hard to say, and I don't have the statistics on that one, but I would say a big chunk of us are going to deal with some kind of traumatic event at some point in our lives, and many of us will deal with a number of them. So I would guess that very few people escape totally of having no trauma in their life. So we're all going to face it probably at some point or another.
At some point. So let's make sure we know how to deal with it.
Yeah. But the other one that is less known is what we refer to as chronic distress, sometimes referred to as toxic stress. Okay. And it just means that this is a kind of a set of circumstances, usually over a period of time, that the person undergoes or experiences. The one that is classically used is the child that's criticized heavily. They get the sense that, I can't do anything right because I can't do this, don't do that,
right.
You need to do this.
Over and over again.
Yes, and they get that message over and over again, as you said. And this really starts to look like a traumatic experience. And in fact, we don't talk about that as much in the literature, but when we talk about symptoms that come out of trauma, and we talk about the symptoms that come out of chronic distress, they start to look an awful lot alike.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, it is. And we kind of tend to dismiss the chronic distressful stuff. It's kind of like, well, get over it and get on with your life.
Right. Buck up and just keep going.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Pull yourself up with your bootstraps.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's way deeper.
Yeah. For some people, it's going to be a very difficult challenge to get away from not the chronic distressful experiences, but to get away from the core beliefs that come out of them, which look a lot, again, like trauma, negative core beliefs.
Interesting. And I've heard at least with kids, if you say something, negative to them, there's a ratio of how many positive versus negative. Is that true? And if that is, do we know the statistics on that?
Yeah, the basic concept is any two individuals interacting with each other, we want at least 5 positive to every negative. What we don't normally understand is a negative can just be a kind of a dirty look.
It doesn't have to be verbal, right? It can be any interaction.
Yeah,
any
nonverbal
type of interaction.
Yeah. The idea of the cold shoulder between a couple.
Right.
Actually, they've found that the shoulder on the one that's giving the cold shoulder actually lifts as they go by each other. So it can be totally nonverbal, but it can be anything at all. It can be almost an innocuous statement. And one of the ones that we find that's quite common is, why did you do that? Because it immediately puts a person, the defensive person, as if they had done something wrong or could have done it better.
Right.
And so
it's more accusatory than it is.
Yeah. So how come you did that, or help me understand, is a whole lot better way to approach those kind of circumstances. But it is these little things that if the individual starts to misinterpret them, they'll add up to a number of negative core beliefs, and it becomes this kind of chronic distress that we're talking about.
And I also, I love the other example that you used in the book of even just someone in a really toxic work environment where they're just feeling that stress and that strain, and that can show that person can be showing symptoms just as severe as someone that had gone through a very truly traumatic experience.
I've dealt with a number of individuals that everything was kind of going along very well in their life, and then they got a new boss. And the boss typically was a micromanager, very critical, always wanted the person to reach a higher standard of performance. And people, some people can react to that reasonably positively, but most people cannot.
Right.
And it highlights this other piece that it's not whether we're children or teenagers or adults. These kinds of experiences can happen at any age. And, one of the examples, speaking of employment again, is the person that's laid off and doesn't have any good prospects for being hired into another job. Well, if that goes on for a while, that can be
strain, that's stress.
That's chronic distress. Yeah. And then they start to wonder about their own value and start to doubt themselves. And we start to see some of those anxiety symptoms build up. And I think that's an important note there. Whether it's trauma or chronic distress, what we're really seeing in emotionality is anxiety building up and getting worse over time. And that can really turn into actual disorders, including generalized anxiety disorder. The other thing that's interesting about this is it also bleeds into depression. And we're now seeing that it's sometimes kind of which comes first, the chicken or the egg, which comes first, depression or anxiety. My own personal and professional belief is it's mostly anxiety driven. Now, there can be other reasons for depression, but we see that they're quite commonly now kind of going hand in hand.
Being seen together, being paired together.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so how do we make sense of distressful and traumatic experiences if we're going to be going through them at some point, or if we already have and we're trying to overcome these? How do we make sense of all of this?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand that chronic distress is quite common. You asked earlier about how many people experience trauma. A certain percentage.
Right.
Almost everybody,
right.
Maybe once or twice, and maybe more than once or twice. But with chronic distress, that's almost an affliction of our modern day and age. And so many people just are in a constant sense that they're being distressed for multiple different reasons. And so the first thing is to understand that, yes, this is a problem, and yes, it is going to cause some anxiousness, but yes, also, I can manage this much more effectively if I understand what the core beliefs are behind it, and then start to shift those into positive core beliefs. So we talked about the individual that lost his or her job and starts to doubt their capabilities, their worth in the workplace.
Right.
And okay, I always like to say, who wants you to believe that? And when you ask that question, the answer is always the same. Nobody wants me to believe that.
Yes.
Okay, so what are you going to do about it? And these people, all of us, can take the responsibility to change our core beliefs. Yes, I'm not employed right now. That's factual.
It's fact. Right.
But it doesn't have anything to do with my worth.
It's my worth as a person.
Yeah.
And yet we tie that so quickly.
Yeah, exactly right. And unfortunately, for particularly men, they see them in their profession or their work or their job as their identity. Well, no, that's not their identity. That's what they do to earn a living.
But I mean, even as we introduce each other, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm a doctor.
Right.
I'm an engineer. I am a CEO. I am, we're even saying I am instead of, oh, this is what my profession is.
Yes.
So.
And again, we ask each other, oh, well, what do you do?
Yeah.
And again, it puts us on the spot as if that defines who we are. Well, it doesn't define at all who we are. It helps us understand ourselves. But if that's where our whole identity comes from, then we're kind of walking down a path that's probably not going to be as beneficial as truly understanding the real core beliefs of who they are, that they're worthy individuals, they're very capable, and they have a lot to offer regardless of the circumstances. And whether they're a doctor or somebody that works in construction or somebody that is teaching, it doesn't make any difference. Their value is not defined by their job, unless, of course, that's the way they see it.
So in all of this, can you help us understand more on the brain level, the mind level? Can the mind actually change the brain?
Well, our best guess under neuroscience right now is yes, it can. We believe that as our brain kind of gets to its fullest development level at age 25, it doesn't stop developing. It just continues to create new connections, neurons connecting in different ways with other neurons. Right. We look at evidence from the outside to see if there is really brain function changes. We can see that to some degree under functional MRI. But the best evidence is just behavioral patterns. We see people that have consistently acted in one way, and it doesn't take much brain power to just continue to do something. So, for example, most people don't consider driving a car as anything very strenuous for themselves. They just kind of almost go into automatic pilot.
Yeah,
you just drive the car.
Right.
Now, that wasn't true when we first learned how to drive the car. Well, the same thing is true of patterns of thinking. And so we automatically think along certain lines. And so what we're talking about here is if we focus and pay attention to something that to us is almost automatic, and negative core beliefs are generally speaking quite automatic,
right.
Sometimes conscious, sometimes subconscious. But if we bring them up to a conscious attention level, then we can start to change them. And we see the evidence of that as how people, for example, recover from addictions, how people that were guilty of domestic violence, all of a sudden within a 90-day period are now thinking quite differently, reacting differently. They're not tied into those previous patterns of behaviors. Well, that's easy for these rather big things like addictions and domestic violence.
Right.
But we're seeing it in much more subtle ways as well across the board. And so, for example, somebody thinks, well, I'm just no good at math. Well, if they attend to that and focus to it, they can improve their math skills significantly. But they're changing that core belief first as to what they want to believe about themselves, and then they act on it, and then they practice it.
Yeah.
And so we see that our best guess in the neuroscience is new neural pathways are being connected that become the new automatic pathways. And so when we see these real changes, people that have been offenders in domestic violence multiple times, like I said, within a very short period of time of approximately 3 months, if they really pay attention
Really
to it
work
and
at
focus on it and work on it daily, all of a sudden the light comes on and they say, oh, wait a minute, that didn't work for me. And it never worked for me. And it was a horrible way for me to behave. And I'm never going back again. And they don't.
Wow.
We used to see in domestic violence that about 80% of the people would reoffend.
Okay.
But if they go through a program that gives that attention focused on how they can change their core beliefs, it switches, and then only 20% reoffend.
Wow.
And most of them, if they continue at it,
Right.
they'll get it.
Wow.
And it is this idea that we can change how our brain's functioning by focusing and using the mind to pay attention and then consistently, day in and day out, refocus to that which is, as we say, accurate and constructive.
Yeah, it's almost rewriting that script, right? If you
It
can
is.
rewrite that script, these neurons can connect in a different way, which will result in something more positive that you're hoping for, right?
Exactly.
So.
It's been described as laying down a new superhighway for our neurons to kind of travel down. And so we don't have to go back to previous perspectives. A lot of times people think, well, I'll eventually slip back to where I was before. But the great thing about all of this is when we develop these new ways of thinking and focused attention, it just works for us. In psychology, we call it self-reinforcing, and we're not going back. Our brain has changed, but more importantly, how we see ourselves has changed. And when we see ourselves more positively and accurately, we're not going back there.
Wow.
I can personally attest to that.
That's so reassuring, especially where a big message from the world is you can't teach a dog new tricks.
Yes.
Right. And this is going way deeper. This isn't about new tricks. This is about who they are as a person. It's re-understanding their identity at the fundamental core level. And if you can do that, then it sounds like lots of things can change.
That's exactly the right metaphor that we want people to understand. But unfortunately, science and these statements of supposed wisdom, like the dog can't be taught new tricks. We used to think that the brain was pretty well developed, 1920, and that's it.
And there was not very much neuroplasticity. Beyond that, here you go.
Yes.
And now we're realizing how little we do know about the brain.
and we're still learning, and it is exciting, but you're right. There's a lot more to learn.
Yes, there is. Okay, so if a person does find themselves experiencing trauma or, this constant distress, how do we cope with this in a positive way?
Well, it is basically, again, understanding the real situation that has occurred. People need to tell their story, but they also have to have the opportunity to kind of not necessarily rewrite their story, but put the story on that they want. I was talking with somebody the other day, and she was plagued with trauma. And as you often see with people who've gone through both chronic distress as well as traumatic experiences, it'll affect their sleep patterns. One of the things that we're really concerned about is they don't get enough sleep. They get a disturbed sleep. They often develop nightmares or night terrors. But this particular individual is dealing with repetitive nightmares. And she needed to tell her story. She needed to have somebody listen, and that's one of the reasons why mental health professionals, but clergy, good friends, they allow people to tell their stories. In this particular case, the person was talking about a dream that was distressing to her. And I said to her, well, let's stop for a moment. And what I'd like you to do is write the ending to that dream like you would like it to turn out.
Like you had control over it and this is how you wanted it to be.
Yes, exactly right. Now, I'm not much on dream analysis, but it was pretty self-explanatory that she was really concerned about something. And when she got that kind of prompt from me, she said, well, I don't know how I want the story to turn out. And I said, yeah, I can kind of understand why you might say that, but I'd like you to think about it for a few moments. And she did. And she said, well, what if it turned out this way? And I said, well, is that really what you would like? Is that the best outcome? And she stopped and thought about that. She said, no, what would be the best outcome? And she explained it. And she wrote the end of the story of that dream. So people need to express themselves, but they also need to understand that they're not stuck at some endpoint, that they have control of their lives and they can move forward in positive ways. And again, it's this idea, is there a negative core belief? There always is. What can you do about it? Well, I can come up with a desired core belief, and then I can start to act on it, and I can put that into application or practice in my life, and that will become my reality, and that's the reality that counts.
Yes, yes. It's almost the difference of someone being acted upon instead of acting. It's like you were giving her that opportunity to act instead of her feeling like she was acted upon.
Yeah.
Almost over and over and over again. And I mean, just to open up that ability for her to see that she can decide that. And when you're in this state, in these negative core beliefs, so much of it is that we feel powerless.
Yes.
And if we can tell someone, you can rewrite your story. I mean, that's powerful.
It is. And it gets out of that negative core belief, I'm helpless or powerless. And it really helps them establish within their own mind that they can move their life forward in ways that they want to. So I never come up with what somebody ought to say. I ask them to struggle with it, to come up with something that's going to work better for them. And they develop their own kind of plan for moving their lives forward. It is amazing that all people have imaginations, and they can turn that imaginations into a sense of reality within themselves. And that is an amazing capability.
It's almost as a man thinketh, so is he. Right?
Yes. Goes back a long ways.
Long ways.
And it's still true.
It's still true. Wow. And I feel like as we help people create their own vision, they can probably create their ultimate success of what they would deem in their mind, right? Like you said, she rewrote it, and then you asked her, what did you say? Is that exactly how you want it to be? Or is that the best, that you want your dream to end like that? I mean, if we can just probe these questions so that they can realize that they can set their sights as high as they want to be able to heal, and they can do that. They have permission to do that. Sometimes all we need is just permission to see higher.
I think that's exactly right. And a little bit of encouragement to say, yes, you can. And I always like to say, as somebody leaves, I hope this is at least somewhat encouraging.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Don't we all need that? Don't we all need that encouragement? So let's go into Ty's story. Tell us about Ty.
Well, Ty's story is a pretty good example of what we're talking about, because Ty believed that he had the anger gene. Now, there is no anger gene, but he believed he had it.
Okay.
And the problem was from early in his life, he would have these explosions of temper, anger, and rage. And he would go from 0 to just exploding in a matter of literally seconds. Whew. And it was a sad thing for him in many ways, because he knew that this was totally wrong. He wasn't trying to do it to control or manipulate people, but in a funny sort of way, he still was. And he still knew that it was wrong. And particularly when he just really lost it. And the sad thing to him was that it never happened in public. Well, very rarely. He said there was one incident, but it mostly happened in the confines of his home. So his rage or high degree of anger was directed usually because he got frustrated, upset, and it might have been upset about a lot of different things, but it only take one little thing to really set him off.
Yeah.
And of course, that would be something that his partner did, or his children, and one of his children did. And of course, that rage would be directed at them.
At them.
And when that happened, not only did he feel horrible about how he had acted, but he felt also horrible about, and he knew that he was harming or injuring his children. Now, he never got physical with them, but he did put his fist through some drywall one day and later learned that, oh, by the way, that's a domestic violence offense.
Really?
And so, he
hard.
did try everything that he could think of. He read self-help books, but nothing seems to work. He would be okay for sometimes weeks, but then
Something
the
would
tension,
just snap.
the tension would build up and he would snap. And when he snapped, everybody wanted to run for cover.
Oh,
And he really couldn't stand this about himself, but he really did believe that he was born this way and there was nothing he could do about it. He was stuck with, I am angry. And it wasn't until, I think it was in his 40s, if I remember correctly, that he actually did. It wasn't me, but he went to talk to a therapist, and she had a good approach that she said, would you be willing to really put the attention towards this day in and day out? And he said, well, I've tried everything else.
right.
You know,
right.
what's to lose?
Yeah, like,
Well, maybe my temper.
yeah.
And so she explained to him many of the things that we talk about in key core beliefs to focus on what he was understanding about himself negatively, how to better understand what was going on and how those tensions would build up, and really started to focus on understanding how he would feel certain ways and then how he could change that into more positive ways. We talk about simple techniques like deep breathing.
Right.
And that was one of the things he practiced, not when he got angry, but every day.
Oh,
And
okay. He
when
made that more of a habit.
made it a habit, yeah. Well, that was only one of a number of habits, but it wasn't all encompassing. He didn't spend an hour a day on this. It was something but he did pay attention to it every single day. And when he had an experience, he actually made a little log note as to what he was actually feeling. We're going to talk about more of this in later chapters, but it's what we refer to as emotional self-regulation. But in doing this, he started to really focus on his desired core belief. I am calm and I am kind.
Oh,
And within about, several weeks, he started to say, wait a minute, this is different. I'm different. And he kept working and kept working. And within about 3 months,
3 months.
he realized that, no, he didn't have the anger gene. That was a story that he told himself. What he did know was what was really true in his life. It had always been true in his life, that he was a kind and caring person. And in most circumstances, he was calm and was really helpful for others.
Right.
And it's interesting to me, one of the aspects of this story is by the end of about 3 months, he really had developed trust in himself.
Oh,
That's
amazing.
really cool, in my opinion.
Yes. Yes.
It took a little longer for his wife and children to develop that trust in him.
Right, because that needs to be, rebuilt.
Yeah, and they had to see that was going to be consistent and it was going to be lasting and enduring.
Yes.
It wasn't just going to be for 3 months.
Right.
But it ultimately changed the nature of his relationship with them and with his children. And most importantly, started to see himself as who he really was, a person that wanted the best for others and cared about them. And when tensions came along, as they always do, he could deal with that. He also recognized that part of this problem came from when he was growing up, and there was a fairly good amount of criticism in his life. And that was anything that he could misinterpret as criticism. That would lead to, as you said, snapping, and then the
Yes.
explosion would occur. So all of this came together to work for him. It wasn't just one thing or another, but about 5 or 6 things really helping him to understand who he really always has been. He always cared about others, would do anything for other people if he could. He was that way, and he knew that he would never change going forward. As far as never leaving behind this caring, kind person that he was, and never going back. He still got angry every once in a while,
Right.
but it didn't explode. And even he said one time I got upset with my son because we disagreed about something.
Okay.
And I got ticked off and I went down the hallway. And
Good for him. That
yeah,
he removed himself, right?
yeah.
He's learning these.
And he went into his bedroom and looked into the mirror over the dresser drawers and he said, "No, that's not who I am." He went back down the hallway and talked with his son and apologized, actually. And they went on to have a wonderful conversation.
Wow. Wow. That really is astounding to realize that this man, obviously as an adult, having multiple kids, having a partner, telling himself this story the entirety of his life, never feeling like he was going to change, feeling trapped. And within
Yes.
a matter of months, you're not talking years in the making to switch this, mindset. You're talking a matter of weeks to truly change behavior to that level and that extent.
Glad you pointed that out because it was over 15 years of living with himself in that context. But it doesn't take 15 years to undo it.
To reverse it.
And to move into that strong, positive way of feeling a certain amount of peace and assurance does take, we say, somewhere between 7 weeks and 10 weeks, depending on the person. That if they are willing to really get in there and do the work on a daily basis, it does take a little bit of effort every day. That consistency really makes a difference. But yeah, they'll see the results in a matter of a few weeks that it's going in a good direction. And by, like I said, 7 to 10 weeks, it's locked in. They're not going back because it's just too good.
Right. They're seeing themselves, and I'm sure they're feeling so much more peace and
Yes.
fulfillment and everything in their life.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're living true to their true identity.
Exactly right. And I like that in the context. We see success as money, power, prestige.
Yeah.
But what is true success? It's just exactly what you just said. They're seeing themselves in that more positive light. And there is that greater sense of peace and contentment and satisfaction.
Nice. So in your opinion, do you believe that everyone can be healed?
Really good question. And the answer is definitively yes. I haven't seen the exception to the rule. Now, there are some people that are just not ready to change.
So if I'm understanding that right, they are the ones that don't want to change. It's not that they can't. They're just choosing not to. Is that
Well,
what
I
I'm
would
understanding?
kind of modify that.
How
They don't believe they can change yet. And sometimes we talk about in psychology that people are resistant. I don't think they're resistant. They just don't have that sense of faith in themselves that this is even possible. But I never give up on them. And I just say, the door is always open. And, at some point, you'll be ready. We used to say in drug and alcohol recovery, it's not ready, willing, and able. It's willing, I really want this. Able, I think I can do it. And that's the problem. And I'm ready to do it now. And when they get to that point that they start to believe, and we can work on little things to kind of show them the way, to give them kind of that insight that, yeah, I can change this. Well, if I can change this, maybe I can change this too. Yeah, that gets that sense that not only are they want to do it, willing, but they have that ability to do it, and then they're ready.
And then something really ignites, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so you're saying, you've had a very broad, you've had a very broad experience with so many different people. You're telling me from drug abuse to domestic violence to, women who have gone through, horrible cases of abuse. You're saying that all of these people you've been able to see be healed.
I haven't found the exception to the rule. Everybody has, and I think this is important to emphasize, we all have the ability to heal. Sometimes we need a little help. So we've said the expression before, no doctor ever healed a broken bone. They just set it and cast it and stabilized it.
Right.
But the bone healed itself. That's true for bones. That's true for brains. That's true for minds. And we all can heal.
Wow. So as we know that there's these amazing positive ways to heal, what are negative coping mechanisms that people use when they don't see the positive way to do this.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge because we lock into those negative core beliefs and statements that, oh, this is who I am, this is me. And then we start to figure out ways, and then boy, we're creative, of how we can quote unquote cope with them. And the means of coping just go on and on. The one that kind of surprised me, because I like to be outside and do some running and walking and stuff like that. But people that are exercising 4 hours a day, every day, that's a coping mechanism. They're escaping for those 4 hours, doing something that's somewhat helpful for them.
Right.
But
they've taken it to that extreme.
Yeah. And it's not helping them in the sense of getting over it any more than drugs or alcohol, any more than anger or rage, any more than gambling, or any of the other kind of compulsive behaviors like self-harm, eating disorders. They're all reflections of how we're trying to cope. The other one that I think is kind of interesting, and a lot of businesses really like this, is the workaholic.
The workaholic,
yeah. And we laugh about that term, but some people are literally addicted to work. Why? They don't want to deal with themselves. They may not even want to deal with their families. So they just put in more and more hours at work. Even if they're at home, they're working. And so all of these kinds of things are what we refer to as totally ineffective. They're kind of coping mechanisms because they give people a kind of a period of time to escape.
Right.
But
it's only temporary.
Yeah, it's only temporary.
It's just this
and what are they escaping
relief.
from? They're escaping from themselves. Doesn't work because the problem's always still there.
Yes. They haven't dug deep enough to heal fully. But it really is easy to put on that Band-Aid. And that's what's so hard is that the Band-Aid is so accessible, right? All of these things that you said, so many of them are just right at the reach of our fingers.
We like to say that it doesn't take any mental power to engage in any of these things. It's almost automatic. They're automatic reactions. We talk later in the book about how they're related to fight, flight, freeze, or attack ourselves. And all of this just doesn't work. It never has, never will. It works, like you said, temporarily to get a little bit of an escape. But that's not any kind of real escape any more than using drugs are a real escape from anything.
Right. Wow. So can we develop constructive coping abilities as we go through this?
Absolutely. And that's what we're looking for. These are among the key skills that we identify in key core beliefs that we can understand. What can we do? I mentioned one a few minutes ago, just deep breathing, learning how to do that. But there's so many other things. I'm a real fan of meditation. I certainly believe in things like, for example, one of my associates says, I just want to be outside and get some fresh air.
Nature,
in nature, and certainly outstanding. Any kind of physical activity that is done for a reasonable period of time, that would normally be between maybe 10 minutes and an hour at the most, can be very, very effective. Even things like hobbies, if they're, enjoyable hobbies, they can be a way that we can kind of take care of ourselves. And we like to say that this is all about, spending a little time taking care of ourselves. And the other way is to develop those kinds of interactions with people that we trust and are comfortable with, to spend some quality time, whether over a good meal or just watching a movie together. It's those kinds of things that take us out of those negative behavioral patterns and move it into something that really does provide some support. We all need rest. We all need to recreate or recreation from time to time. We all need some alone time, but we also need some connecting time. And these are coping key skills that do work.
And it sounds like if you just eliminate the negative and you don't replace it with a positive, you may just as easily keep reverting back, right? So helping people really get clear on what do you want to add into your life. As we eliminate these negative coping mechanisms, what are you going to replace it with? Exactly
right. One of the things that we found out working with people with severe addiction problems with drugs or alcohol is that, they could kind of get over that, so to speak. But if they didn't have those fundamental coping key skills, if they didn't start to have those really positive core beliefs about themselves, they would switch over to something else. And it may not be another substance, but it would be a behavioral pattern that just really wasn't very effective.
Just putting on the Band-Aid.
Because they were never comfortable with themselves. And that's what we were really looking for. That's why all of these things are so important. We want people to have that peace. Well, what does that mean? Well, as somebody said it, I feel comfortable in my own skin. Yeah.
Well, and the reality is how many people actually do. There's so many people they don't even like looking at themselves in the mirror, let alone being in a car with no music, no sound, nothing. Like, can you just sit with yourself, with your own thoughts?
Yeah.
A lot of people, that's very scary to them.
It really is. And so the good news is, as we said a few minutes ago, we can all heal if we come to better beliefs, accurate, constructive core beliefs about ourselves. And if we can use those kinds of activities that will really be supportive to us as we heal.
Okay. So I noticed there's a number of resources that people can use that you have to offer people. I'm going to make sure everybody knows these so that they can help themselves or help anyone in need that is really struggling through this. So the first one is ask a trusted friend or family member for assistance. Read books that have helped others develop new approaches to their problems. You can join a counseling group. You can talk with a member of the clergy. You can participate in a peer support group such as Alcoholics Anonymous. Next point is get in touch with your higher power, seek spirituality, engage in meditation and mindfulness. And the last one you have here is consult with a licensed mental health professional. I think all of these can be used to really help an individual go through some of these really hard
Yeah, it really is. And I think the important thing here is so many people feel that they're alone and isolated and they don't know where to turn. In fact, they don't think there's any place to turn. But there are resources, and you've identified those that are also listed in the book. There are many others. These are just examples. But we're not alone. And we can find people that do care about us and want the best for us and will be supportive for us. And nobody has to feel isolated. In fact, nobody is, unless, of course, they believe they are.
Yes, they believe they are.
But the good news is everybody can come back. Everybody can be whole.
Wow. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This was such a wonderful understanding of what happens when we don't do things effectively and what happens when we do, and to realize that we're not alone and we can change. I feel like those are really big fundamental principles. And I heard a man once talk. He was helping with inmates out of prison, and someone was telling him, spots don't change. A leopard can't change his spots.
Right.
And he said that he's heard that a lot, and it's been so frustrating to him. And one time he finally replied back to a person and said, leopards can't change their spots, because he was dealing with people who had done some really horrible things consistently in their life. And he responded back. He said, well, it's a good thing I don't work with leopards. I work with people, and I see human beings change every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reality is we are beings of change, and we can change, and we're not doing this alone. And as long as people realize that, there's so much potential for their life to become more peaceful and more fulfilled. And that's why you're here. And I'm just so grateful that you're sharing this.
Well said. We're not animals. We have amazing potentials and abilities. And all we've got to do is figure out how to get them working for us in better ways.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're excited to jump into the next chapter.
Great. Thanks.